Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. Welcome back to the show. Excited to have our friend Ashley Pinkeney joining us here once again as a family mental health counselor, marriage counselor. The name of her company is Hummingbird Marriage and Family Therapy, based out of Rochester, New York. Please welcome Ashley back. How are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm great. Good to see you, sweetheart. For those new time listeners, tell them a little about what you do. And of course, let's establish the website, which I know it's hummingbirdmft.com, correct?
Yes, it is. So I am the founder of Hummingbird Marriage and Family Therapy, which is a private practice in Rochester, New York. I'm a marriage and family therapist who supports people through the ebbs and flows of life, helps them overcome longstanding issues that they see as burdens, building value-oriented lives. And then I also specialize in life transitions, eating disorders, which we're going to talk about today, and grief and loss.
Well, thank you for being here, for joining us. And I guess it's episode 6. So we've been talking quite a few weeks now. And
Yes.
yeah, you did mention eating disorders will be the topic for today, which, my goodness, I mean, there's so much that goes into that. So let's establish a little bit about eating disorders. And I'm sure there's so many. Where did you want to start, Ashley?
So, just giving an overview of what eating disorders are. So, they're a psychological condition that affects your relationship with food. They actually are like the most deadly mental illness, only second to like opioid overdoses. So, in the spectrum of life, like there about 9% of the US population is going to experience some sort of an eating disorder. So, it's something that's very serious that a lot of times does not get talked about in the mental health world, particularly because it's not just the mental health piece, but it also is the physical health thing. But there is a mutual agreement that there are many different types of eating disorders. And, I just want to educate a bit about what those different types are, what do they look like, what to look at, and how to get support around those things as well.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. And by the way, eating disorders can affect both women and men as well, right? I think back in
Yes.
the day we used to think more of women, but no, right? It's equal game. And at what age normally are you seeing people starting with eating disorders? As early as what age to as old as what age?
Well, I think that there's a difference between like eating disorders and disordered eating behaviors. So, like disordered eating can be something such as like picky eating or like, small restrictions of food or, small episodes of like binge eating. But then when you get into the disordered behaviors, it could be at very young ages, depending on what's going on in your life. Like I've seen and worked with kids who are as young as like 12 and 13 who have been having eating disorders, restricting their intake or like, binging, purging, or, just using behaviors trying to modify their bodies and their food intake. So it could start quite young and it can just go across the whole spectrum of life. And I've worked with people who are in their 60s who have been like struggling with eating disorders throughout their whole life. So it's
Wow.
nothing that discriminates by age or anything like that. It's
Okay.
just a coping skill people try to use to manage stuff in their life. And food can often be an element of control for them to be able to manage.
All right. And let's break it down. I know there's quite a few different types. Where did you want to start?
So, like one of the most common ones I think most people know about is anorexia nervosa. So, that's an obsession where you have with weight, food, calories. So, people with anorexia can have an intense fear of gaining weight, which can lead to restriction of food intake. And there also could be like excessive exercising within that as well to restrict your like calorie intake as part of that. Then we also have bulimia nervosa, which is recurrent episodes of binge eating with compensatory behaviors such as like purging behaviors. There might be fasting, excessive exercise, use of like laxative diuretics or other medications in order to maintain or to reduce their weight as well. And they might be very concerned about their body weight and shape. So those two are some of the more familiar ones. Then we also have binge eating disorder, which is these recurrent episodes of binge eating behaviors. So people may eat much more rapidly than normal, feeling more full, like very uncomfortably full, past the point of satisfaction, eating like quantities of food without feeling hungry, and then feeling like guilty or depressed after having eaten those quantities of food. And then the last one that I want to talk about is ARFID, which is a relatively newer diagnosis that a lot of people don't know about, which is avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. So where there's an eating or feeding disturbance and like an apparent like lack of interest for food. So this is different than anorexia where people are, you know, purposely not eating. It just is this lack of interest in food. There's avoidance based on like sensory characteristics with food. So, you know, there might also be concerns about like adverse consequences such as like vomiting or getting sick from foods. And a lot of time there's these like sensory issues that go along with it that make food just so unappetizing and uncomfortable to eat that's where this one comes up.
Oh, can you share that further? What do you mean with sensory wise?
So some of the people who I have worked with who have RFID also are on a like Asperger's or an autism spectrum. And this is not
Okay.
by large the
Okay.
majority of people, but I've had several people where there have been an overlap with that. So some people who have sensory processing disorders may also have like a correlation with having some RFID symptoms as well, because of like that is also a sensory processing issue with food. Or I've had people who have concerns with like vomiting due to like having adverse food reaction, like getting like, you know, food poisoning related to a certain particular food, and then they just no longer eat that or any foods that are like that, and then it kind of slides into an RFID type of a situation. So that's not by and large the general population, but those are some of the ones that I have seen with the clients that I've worked with.
Got it. Okay, good to know.
Mhm.
Thank you so much. And by the
Mhm.
way, if you are just tuning in, Ashley Pinkeney, how can we reach you?
So you can reach me on my website, which is hummingbirdmft.com. Phone number here in Rochester is 585-443-3124. Feel free to reach out, and you can also send me an email at hello@hummingbirdmft.com.
Perfect. And I want to know what brought you into this area of eating disorders, of course. But
Mhm.
before that, is there any other ones that you want to mention? Any other eating disorders that we missed so far?
Like one other concern that is part of eating disorders is body dysmorphic disorder, which can
Mhm.
be this obsession with this imaginary defect of physical appearance or this extreme concern about like slight physical blemishes or other things that might people might not see. So, you know, there might be this inaccurate perception of your body and specific body parts such as like your hair, your skin, your stomach, thighs, like where you think they may be bigger or smaller. So it's like having this inaccurate view of how your body is. And then
Mhm.
because of the dysmorphia within that, utilizing other behaviors such as like binging, purging, that can try to modify those body parts to look the way that you would like them to do or what is seen as quote unquote socially acceptable. And that could be a lot of motivation for people of trying to just modify their bodies.
Right. Well, what brought you into this field? Would you mind sharing how you specifically, started working with those with eating disorder, or also known
Mhm.
as ED? Correct.
Yes. So it's a long and varied story. So a couple different reasons I got into eating disorders. First of all, just like my history as a marriage and family therapist, I focused early on in my career with medical marriage and family therapy, which is working in medical populations with doctors, nurses, you know, dietitians, like the whole spectrum of clinicians with people who have mental health concerns. So there's an overlap because eating disorders do have the physical components, and working as part of a multidisciplinary team is something that I was doing a lot. And eating disorders kept coming up with that and people needing therapists to work with them in that environment and working amongst the rest of that team. And then from there, I started working in multiple levels of treatment for eating disorders. So in my career, I've worked in partial hospitalization setting, which is like one step out of inpatient. I currently do some work at a residential facility here in Rochester, New York. I worked in outpatient, and I've also worked in intensive outpatient as well. So across the multiple levels of treatment in eating disorders, I've just gotten to know so many people who just need that additional support. And you know, eating disorders can often be looked at as a illness that only impacts like women, or particularly like Caucasian women. And like there's so much with like women of color that don't have access to these services or know about eating disorders. So I also just wanted to be like a somewhat familiar face in those spaces for people who may not have ever known that they could have an eating disorder, and like trying to help them understand that of what, you know, what that is and how treatment looks like.
Got it. And what have you learned over the years of working with so many people with eating disorders? Would you mind sharing a little bit of what you
Mm.
notice about, these people affected in particular?
Yeah, so like one thing I noticed was that there were just some like gaps in treatment, like I was saying, that oftentimes people think of eating disorders, they think of heterosexual, white, young females. However, eating disorders impacts such a wide demographic of persons and ethnicities. So, one of my favorite books that I recommend for a lot of my clients is The Body Keeps Score by Sonia Renee Taylor. And the author states that society can determine what bodies are seen as most valuable. And oftentimes, like Black and brown bodies are seen as less valuable and can be treated as such in healthcare systems. So, which can result in this reduced access to service or a lack of education about the impact of eating disorders on people of color. So, due to these inequities, like BIPOC persons are significantly less likely to first be diagnosed with an eating disorder, to be asked about any eating disorder symptoms and receive treatment because there's a lack of access to that. So I wanted to make sure that in my practice there's a space of being able to know these things, get access and have connections to that, and also I can educate people on it. And then there's also these like unique barriers within a lot of my clients who are also in the LGBTQ community where they're seeking out treatment, because eating disorders are also, like I said, so prevalent in like cisgender white females that like those who are part of the LGBTQ community are often underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed with eating disorders. So there's so much access that people need, or there's these stereotypes that can happen just from the prevalence of eating disorders that people just don't know where to go. And I want to make sure that I'm a voice that's able to do that, of giving, where to go, what to do, who to connect to, all those
And
sort of
there's a
things.
book you mentioned that's helpful. Could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the book is called The Body Is Not an Apology, and it talks about being able to have like liberation within your body and how to not lean into certain stereotypes. In a lot of ways, it's like from a perspective of um liberation for people who are in larger bodies and can lean into some information about health at every size. So it's something that I like to recommend to people who particularly have some struggles with some body dysmorphia, about being able to just kind of look at how our bodies and like the society can like look at inequities that we have, or perceived inequities, and make us feel like we're less than, when that's not necessarily true. Like we have the ability to take up space and to just be like connected and like ourselves, and we don't have to constantly downgrade ourselves based on these arbitrary beliefs about what is a good or a bad body.
Good to know. Thank you so much.
Mhm,
So you mentioned over time now,
mhm.
how does eating disorder really develop, and the importance, of course, of getting that community help and community support as well.
Mhm. So, I mean, the eating disorders, there's a lot of different ways that they can develop. So, I usually introduce it from this perspective of the multi-determined nature of eating disorders, which looks at precipitating factors such as biological and genetic factors. So we might just have like a genetic predisposition to development of eating disorders. There's also like the psychological and behavioral part of it. So eating disorders overlap with several different mental health diagnoses, such as like post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder. So there's overlap with those. So it's not saying that everybody who has those
Mm-hmm.
disorders will have an eating disorder, but
But
there is a strong overlap with those ones. And then there's also the sociocultural factors that come into it. So, when we live in certain societies that prize certain body types and ways of looking, it can feel an immense amount of pressure to feel like, okay, I have to look this way, and trying to modify your body to look a way that would be ideal in order to gain success, or to gain love or relationship or connection with people. And oftentimes those are some motivations that people can have, or people have motivations of like if they have trauma experiences of trying
mm-hmm.
to like protect themselves by using those behaviors to control things around them, so that it mitigates like the symptoms of trauma that they're experiencing on a regular basis.
Got it.
So we have the precipitating factors, and then we have the perpetuating factors, which can be, like I said, trauma is also one of those things, life transitions that we happen,
Hmm.
experiences with bullying, the weight stigma, stress, media influence. So those are things that keep going on. So it might have been, some stuff might have been there in the background, but like the stuff that we constantly get access to can keep the eating disorder continually to go to perpetuate itself throughout our lives. So being able to learn how to manage those different things is important in somebody's recovery from an eating disorder.
Got it. And let's remind everyone of all the ways we can reach out to you, Ashley, and how does it work? And then we're going to get into, more details about, how this happens, the therapy that's needed, and how, of course, someone like yourself could be of help. So, website,
Yes.
phone number, social media, anything that you want to share.
All right. So website is hummingbirdmft.com. So that's hummingbird, M as in marriage, F as in family, T as in therapy.com. The phone number is 585-443-3124. And our social media is at Hummingbird MFT on Facebook and Instagram. So you can find me in all of those areas.
Perfect. Thanks so much. So, let's talk specifically about therapy, how it works, and how it can really help.
Yeah. So, one of the things I came to realize with a lot of the clients who I work with is that, there's a lot of pain that can be held and people can internalize this pain and take it out on themselves. So eating disorders can develop as a coping strategy for the precipitating and the perpetuating factors that we were talking about.
Hmm.
So, when you work with somebody in therapy, or when I work with somebody in therapy specifically, the first thing I want to do is make sure that they get connected to the right resources to help them
Hmm.
have a better relationship with food. And for most people who I work with, having an eating disorder, like the connection is like making sure you're connected with a doctor who is informed about eating disorders, and also possibly like a dietitian. And then there's also good social supports that people can also be part of, where you might have like a peer mentor or a coach who works specifically with people with eating disorders, or some of the larger eating disorder networks, such as like Montanito and affiliates. There's also Renfrew. There's a lot of different big organizations that have multiple levels of treatment that people can work through and step down through if they have significant concerns with eating disorders. But the big thing is that we want to get you like nutritionally stable so that you can do the internal work. So when we're doing the actual work for eating disorders, like there's a lot of different ways to work with them. So I'm just going to speak to specifically the perspective I work with eating disorders, which is utilizing internal family systems as a way to not pathologize your mental state or the behaviors associated with many eating disorders. So then with internal family systems, or IFS, so I'll use the short version of it,
Sure.
it believes in like the multiplicity of your mind, and that we all have a self that's inherent wise, and these protective parts such as an eating disorder have an intended purpose of giving us a protection that kind of helps any parts of it that feel like vulnerable or unsafe, like of giving those parts protection so we feel safe. So the outside constraints that are these perpetuating factors I spoke about earlier can force these protective parts of us to get out of their intended purpose and cause them to operate in these extreme ways. So I like to use the analogy of like, if I try to hang a picture on the wall and I need to use a hammer, I have to hammer the nail into the wall. I would use a normal household hammer instead of a sledgehammer, because that would be too much power or too much force, or, just way too much more likely to damage the wall behind us. So like that's a lot with our parts, that we want to be able to use stuff that's proportionate to the situation and not use a sledgehammer for everything. And so for in an eating disorder context, a lot of times people use behaviors and it's like taking a sledgehammer to the wall, and you end up causing so much more damage around you, when it's like, okay, there's other ways of using coping strategies. There's other ways of, feeling protected and utilizing those skills in a way that doesn't harm you at the same time.
Got it. Well, thank you for sharing
Mm.
that. And also, Ashley, what about you mentioned therapy can really help respond to distress in a
Mhm.
sense, right?
Yes. So, what I notice is that, with people who have eating disorders, like a lot of times coming in with that curiosity of like why and how it's developed, as well how to respond to stress or discomfort without harming yourself, like I was saying earlier. So like oftentimes we feel like we're doing the best that we can in trying to help. However, these different burdens that we have can actually be holding on to a lot of pain and causing a lot more issues than we think. So it's like we're trying to do the best I can, but I'm also in pain at the same time. So like, what do I do? So what, there are a lot of things that I tell people that you can work on is like looking at your negative thought patterns that people have that can maintain the eating disorders. And then, as we're looking at these negative thought patterns, which are causing distress, like how do we build coping skills in order to work through those and look at the origin of them? We look at like ourself and like what are actual personal beliefs versus like beliefs that have been put on us, and try to be more like self-led as opposed to being led by like our pain or our hurts and our trauma, which can cause us to respond in these extreme reactions and cause more distress. So we're building new coping skills to deal with the distress and building a good support network of people around us who help provide care, empathy, and safety so that we don't have to utilize negative coping skills to manage things that are distressful to us.
All right, thank you so much. And let's talk more about, the mind. You saying about you said you mostly viewed as like separate entities,
Mhm.
right? But
Yeah.
research continue to show how closely things are kind of correlated, right?
Yes. So good mental health can have a positive impact on your physical health. And just conversely, like poor mental health can negatively impact your physical health as well. So eating disorders impact both of these things because people who are nutritionally malnourished, it's often difficult to maintain your mental health as well because you're not getting, the nutrition that's allowing you to be able to like function at your like adequate space. So, people can have more reluctance to seeking out help related to your mental health than your physical health. Like, if people find out I'm a therapist, like, out in the wild in the casual world, I get so many people who are just like, you're a therapist, and they just like run for the hills. Like, people don't want to talk about their mental health. I'll talk about it all day. But, physical health, people are so much more likely of like, okay, I have an ache, I have a pain. Okay, I'm going to go to the doctor, or I'm going to call urgent care. Like, people don't do that with mental health often, particularly with eating disorders, because there can be so much guilt and shame that's associated with the experience that you're going through that it's hard for people to take that first step and seek out help. And if you're looking for resources for that, like on my website, I have plenty of resources for eating disorders just because sometimes people want to read stuff before they reach out. So those are there. And then I'm also going to update my Instagram later that gives some more resources that I really utilize with a lot of clients as well. Just so people who may be curious about eating disorders and want to figure out if this is something that they're experiencing or even something that like a loved one is experiencing, of just having some resources that are out there.
Got it. All right. Well, thank you so much. We still have 5 minutes left in the show, Ashley. So
Mhm.
let's talk a little bit more about the work you're doing besides eating disorders. There's so
Mhm.
much of an umbrella and broad things you can help others with. Would you mind just giving us a little insight into the other work that you do and how you can help people
Yeah.
that may be listening today?
Yes. And, with the eating disorder part of it, like I also do family therapy work with that, especially for like some of the older adolescents and young adults who I work with, because like I've said, like having an eating disorder, you need a support network. So, in my work, I do family work and I also do couples counseling work for people who have eating disorders, also for people who don't have that. So a lot of couples work that's out here of just like maintaining connections, maintaining ways of like having good conflict resolution with each other, having good support with each other, just building the friendship with each other. So a lot of couples counseling work that's going on here. And then the individual work, like I was saying earlier, I specialize in working with life transitions. So helping people, find the things that are valuable in their lives and working towards those. So being able to let go of longstanding burdens and create these healthy, authentic relationships in the transitions that we go on in life, whether it be, going to college, whether it's getting married, getting a divorce, having your first child, so many things that we go through. And, even going through an eating disorder and the recovery of that is also a life transition of making massive changes. And sometimes making changes can be hard and you need just an extra little bit of support.
Oh my goodness, it really can for sure. And
Yes.
let me just also remind people how we can reach you. Would you mind sharing? And also, if someone does have questions, how does it
Mhm.
work? And you do offer initial consultation, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So if you want to give me a phone call, it's 585-443-3124. I'm located in Rochester, New York, and I see people throughout New York State, both virtually and in person. If you want to contact me via my website, which is hummingbirdmft.com, there is a new client button. Then you can go there, just put a little note in there like, hey, I'm looking for a therapist who's helped me work on eating disorders. Can I schedule a consultation? And I offer like a free 15-minute consultation just to ask about, what do you need? What are you seeing as burden in your life? What are you looking to get out of counseling? And just also just to make sure that I'm a fit of a good therapist for you, because I think therapy is such a personal thing. And I want to make sure that I'm a good fit for you. And if not, I have a network of really great clinicians out there who I know might be a good fit as well. So give a call if you feel like I could be a good therapist fit for you, and we can see where we can go from there.
Oh, thank you so much. Really a pleasure
Mhm,
having you here again. Good to
mhm.
speak with you. And I know you're based out of New York. By the way, only helping clients in New York, or can you help in other states?
Only in New York, just because of the licensure status and everything, but throughout all of New York State, I'm able to work with people.
Just want to make sure. Thank you so much,
Yes.
sweetheart. You have a fantastic day, okay?
All
And
right, thank you.
reach out, guys. Ashley, thank you. And again, the topic today, eating disorders. If you do know someone who's suffering, may think you're suffering,
Mhm,
always good to talk about it, right? Bring it up.
mhm,
And if you're in need of assistance, please reach out to Ashley and get the help that you need because it's possible. And just by the way, I just want to just
mhm,
mention something off cuff here, but like growing up, I'm 45 and I always heard
mhm,
about Princess Diana with an eating
mhm.
disorder, right? Was it bulimia?
Right.
Was I don't know. Then I saw the movie that I forgot which actress portrayed her, and my
Mhm.
heart was like wrenching, like thinking this poor
Yes.
woman having to suffer to feel that way for so long, and just
Mhm,
that's probably the first person I ever heard who what an eating disorder was when I was younger was Princess Diana. It was over the papers and the
mhm,
tabloids, but not everybody knows, and it happens to even people that we might think are celebrities or are so important and they
mhm.
have everything, but you know what, everybody's mental health matters, and it's a sad thing, but we all go through stuff, so just to know you're not alone and there's many other people
Mhm.
out there affected. So I just wanted to bring that up
Yes.
because
No,
thank you.
definitely. I think that that's something important, that's for a lot of people. It might have been Princess Diana, who, like, I could think of myself, like,
Yeah,
actually, that probably is the first person who I've ever heard of who had
yeah.
an eating disorder. And, she was in the UK, and like in the United States, like, up to like 28 million Americans can have eating disorders that we know of, that are
Wow.
reported.
Yeah.
There's so much stuff that's so undiagnosed, and it's such a prevalent thing. And reaching out for the help and support that you need is so important, and having good resources is also so important.
Thank you so much. All right, Ashley, you have a fantastic day. And to all of our listeners as well, stay tuned. More of the show's coming right up. Thanks again,
All
hon.
right.
Bye bye.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned. This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.